what was easier than you expected?
How did you find the right job to apply for?
Can you talk about the day you quit your job?
Did you apply online and wait? How did you find the right job to apply for?
Then maybe the opposite, what was harder?
How did you showcase your oil and gas experience?
It looks like we're sitting by a campfire, I feel like. Hey folks, I'm Greg Smythe, coming to you from the heart of Silicon Valley. I'm bringing you weekly videos on how to be successful in a Fortune 500 company while still having a life. In this week's video, I have a very special guest, my wife, Amanda Baker. We'll be doing our best to answer questions we polled on LinkedIn about our career transition that we did in 2016 from the oil industry to Silicon Valley. I'll let Amanda introduce herself and then we'll get into the questions.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, Greg. Woohoo, I'm excited.
Welcome to my backyard studio.
My name is Amanda Baker. I'm from Marystown, Newfoundland. I've been here in the heart of Silicon Valley for the last almost 5 years.
All right, let's start with some easy questions. During this transition, what was easier than you expected?
Getting the job.
Can you elaborate?
I think it was easier to make my skills more desirable to companies in Silicon Valley, easier than I thought it was going to be.
So you think getting the job was easier, than maybe the opposite, what was harder?
It was probably harder to transition to a new company and a new culture and a new role, harder than I thought it would be, mainly because of the pace. I found the pace in this industry that I'm in now is quite a bit faster.
Getting the job feels like the end, but it's really the beginning. Can you talk about the day you quit your job?
It was still a really difficult thing to do, particularly when you're in a job and with a company that you really loved, and I still love. It was tough. I felt like I was giving up the last 7 years of what I had accomplished, and I was leaving it all on the table. And it turns out that that wasn't the case at all, but that's certainly the way it felt, and I can understand why points that you've talked about before, how when you leave, that's kind of like, that's it. That's the end.
Quitting on the last day, it was a reminder that there's kind of nothing at the end, and I'm trying not to be dramatic. If you don't enjoy the process or enjoy your job, when you quit or retire, whichever comes first, there's nothing kind of at the end. And so if you're not enjoying the process, there's kind of there's nothing there. And that was a helpful reminder of me in the future, like as I'm doing jobs and things, if I'm not enjoying the process, that there's really not a huge reward at the end. And that was very apparent. Like we quit, I want to say like 10 o'clock in the morning, and then by 2 o'clock that afternoon, we were gone, traded in our badges and laptops, and we're driving out the gates for the last time. And that was a weird experience, and it's like your relationship with that company is then over. And people were very gracious about us leaving, and we had a lot of great friends and colleagues we still stay in contact with, but that was a very helpful reminder. I think back on the hardest part, harder than you expected, I think for me actually deciding to quit was really hard. And it's like the day we quit, we kind of knew, but like that process started 6 months prior to that. And then I talked about in one of my first videos about the contract we signed. And I think deciding to quit was really difficult. Like the day you quit is kind of just an administrative thing, it felt like, although it was still emotional. But like we decided like 3 or 4 months before that. We had already hired movers and we'd done all these things, but like that initial decision was probably the hardest part. And that was really what it felt like, you're walking away from this like 10 years of experience.
Also hard to do without a partner. I don't know that I ever would have done it, and I think we've both said that.
I get a lot of questions too, whether you do it if you had kids or not, and like I don't know the answer to that question. It's different for everybody, but it was really good to have a partner, because I think we both had doubts at different stages. I think I'm scared for logical reasons. Have been working for a company, and a good company, for a long time, and potentially walking away from that. And if you had kids, there's no doubt it'd be more complicated. I know if we were like, I've left my job recently, but it's just different now. But it would certainly be more complicated with kids and a family, especially if you're moving cities.
I think looking back now, I would say if you have kids, like go for it, do it. But at the time, if that was me and I had kids or a child, it definitely would have changed the landscape a little.
I think The only thing it would change for me, it depend. Like I probably wouldn't quit a job without a job
Right.
if I had kids,
Yeah.
depending on your financial situation. But we probably that made the uncertainty like that much more. But it will be a lot of work and stuff to get the job while you're still working. But it's definitely possible, and that reduced the level of uncertainty quite a bit.
Okay, my
Cheers.
turn to interview the interviewer. Thanks for inviting me to your office, by the way. I've never been back here before.
What? That's not true.
Greg, did you decide on the exact company you wanted to work for?
Yes. I've talked about it a couple of times. I watched the Elon Musk TED Talk in 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. And I kind of got obsessed with Tesla at the time. I don't think I could actually apply for jobs at SpaceX because I wasn't an American citizen. And that was kind of it. So I was very narrowly focused on Tesla. I think there's some real advantages to that. You can argue. But yes, I was very focused on Tesla.
I would say I was focused on maybe like a handful of companies
Name brand, kind of.
that I wanted to work for.
Yeah.
But within those companies, tried to laser focus on like one, maybe two roles. It wasn't like a blanket, I'm going to apply to Google and, put my resume in for 50 jobs, which honestly I probably did. But when it came down to it, I ended up having to focus on very specific roles and going for those and those only. Okay, what advice do you have for a petroleum engineer with 2 years of experience? What types of roles can they apply for in tech?
Program management is the most transferable skill, I think. If you're an engineer and you have something that's like close to program management, I think the job titles that are specific to here are like technical program manager, engineering program manager, and so I would look for any job titles like similar to that. This is a little bit of a tangent from that, and most people coming from the oil industry feel like an outsider coming into tech. One thing to keep in mind is with startups, especially that are trying to take on or disrupt other industries, that it's likely that they have a very small subset of people that are from that original industry. In my experience, say with Tesla, only 20 or 25% of the people were from traditional automotive backgrounds. And so in some weird way, I was in the majority when I landed there. People that work for me came from Caterpillar and Cummins and Honeywell, all these kind of very diverse backgrounds. There was a few people from Ford and GM. But ironically, you may be in the majority depending on the company you land in. It's a perspective that most people don't have, and until you land inside, you might never even realize that that's the case.
So the next section is about networking and applying for jobs. So how did you start networking?
We knew one person that lived here who was a close friend that went to school with Amanda. That was the best one. That was the best way to start. I think that was huge, and then there was 1 or 2 Newfoundlanders we had found through LinkedIn and had a couple of conversations. So there was 2 or 3 people like that, and that helped us kind of sort out the initial idea. And then the trip we came out here, we stayed in an Airbnb and then spent a bunch of time with our friend that lived here, and then met a series of other people kind of that were living and working here. And that was the most helpful starting point. I talked to a lot of other people through LinkedIn and other kind of networking opportunities. But yeah, that was the start. We knew one person, and then we kind of networked out from there.
Yeah, so one person who introduced us to Silicon Valley, I would say.
Yeah.
One person who helped me get my foot in the door at my current company. Both Newfoundlanders, of course. And that was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Greg, when you were applying for jobs, did you just apply online and wait?
No.
What did you do? I like to call this the black box of applying.
Yeah.
You put your resume in, you wait by the phone, and you literally never hear anything.
Never.
I think I probably applied for maybe 100 jobs. Heard nothing.
Yeah, I think the thing to keep in mind, it is administratively necessary to hire someone. So like you do have to do it, especially for a job that you're in the interviewing process for. But it's very unlikely that applying online and then waiting for a reply will get a response. It's not like, I would say it's close to zero. It's somewhere like less than 5% of people get hired that way. It's just a random guess. And that is where networking, you don't need to know or have a broad network in an industry in a certain company, but you can, especially LinkedIn, has opened up this whole new way of meeting people. And one thing that we did that could be helpful for you is to consider paying for the premium LinkedIn service and you can do very advanced searches. And we used to search for people from oil companies, so all the big major integrated oil companies that used to work for them and that were now working for big tech companies. And there was like a couple of dozen people that came back. So these were not like people from our hometown, but they had very similar backgrounds that were working in jobs we wanted to do. And we messaged a bunch of them, and we did have coffee and network with a bunch of people that way.
I also hired a resume writer, which I didn't actually end up using the resume, but what it did serve me well for was it really made me drill down into my experience and understand how I could apply it to whatever job it was that I was applying for. How did you find the right job to apply for? Tech job titles and descriptions tend to be very different. I agree. I think I didn't know what I was applying for, and when I did manage to get the job, I still didn't really know what it was.
Yeah, I don't think there's any like secret code for deciphering the job titles. I think you have to talk to people. Like for me, I worked as my job title when I left Exxon was procurement specialist. And then that really was equivalent to a global supply manager that specialized in capital equipment. And we called it, the shorthand was CapEx buyer. But that took me like months to figure out that transition, because even purchasing was a sub-department of supply chain. And so even like searching for it on the website, there was no purchasing department. You had to know it was in supply chain, and that global supply management was kind of a synonym for purchasing. And then within that, there was a capital equipment team. And so again, I don't know if there's any way of deciphering that. You have to talk to people. So like understanding what your experience is, and then talking to people that have either worked in the company or similar companies will help you decipher the code. But it's like really important, because then you go to like one of these big company sites, they might have like 5,000 job postings. And so you do need to narrow it down to like a very small subset of those that you're likely qualified for.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Greg, how did you showcase your oil and gas experience?
One of those people that helped us initially recommended us do a portfolio. And although we weren't design engineers, which I would say it's more applicable to doing a portfolio, I would call it more of like a visual resume. And the visual resume, we'll call it, or portfolio, just really helped visually explain the experience we had. And I can't tell you, like in the interviews themselves, we were obviously doing them in person at the time. It just really helped. I actually printed out this nice glossy version and bound it for the interviews. And then after you do your kind of structured presentation, I kept that open. And every time I answered a question, I would reference like photographs in that. And there's two things that a friend of ours pointed out, that when people think of the oil industry, they think of either a gas station or a pump jack. And like, it is funny, but like that is likely true, and it's not like malicious, but it's just people don't understand the complexity of the work that you're the work that you're working on. And showing them pictures of these big complex offshore operations and flying there on helicopters and all kinds of things really opened their eyes to like the complexity and the experience that we were bringing to the table. But honestly, photographs and kind of illustrations were a really helpful way for me to explain that.
I agree, 100%. I think the oil industry is very far from here. Like Greg said, people literally have no idea what it means. And not because they're not interested or, ignorant, they just literally have no exposure to it. Mm-hmm. And so when you're trying to explain your experience, it's really difficult to boil it down into something that's understandable. But for me, in one of my interviews, when I showed a picture of like a helicopter and you fly to the oil rig, it became apparent that like part of your skill set is like working in different environments or remote.
Being adaptive and stuff.
Yeah, so I think that was like definitely a deal sealer.
Yeah, deal sealer, deal closer. The other part of this I would say is that when you're trying to change industries, there's a translation problem on the skills you're trying to transfer, and then there is likely at least a small gap. But it's your job to translate and close that gap. The onus is not on the employees or the company that's trying to hire you. And so a portfolio, doing a great resume, doing a great LinkedIn profile, and helping translate that, the onus is on you to do it. And that takes like a lot of work. I was talking about these like star situations. I wrote out dozens and dozens of them, and I did it 2 or 3 times to like really refine what the the core of it was, and to like strip all of these acronyms and project names and all these things out of it. Yeah.
But I mean, it's true. If you have the ability to make that information usable for the person that you're interviewing with, then in their mind they're thinking, well, this person is a good communicator, and what can they do with things that actually make sense to me? Okay, last question, final question, probably the best one. If you had your time back, what would you do differently? I would not study for the GMAT.
I think that is my biggest regret.
Congratulations on your decision to pursue an MBA or other graduate management degree.
Woohoo! I think I would either one, take more time off and enjoy it. I don't have that many other regrets, if I'm being honest. I think enjoying the time off more, and I think enjoying the time off more, and more so like trusting my own judgment that it was going to be fine. You know, there's just like a lot of uncertainty and things like that, but trusting that, you know, with enough hard work and perseverance that we would figure it out.
Yeah,
And
less worry, more trust.
Yeah, so it's like enjoy the time off and just like kind of lean into the uncertainty and just have trust in myself and us together that we figured out.
Find a good partner.
Yeah.
I genuinely hope you enjoyed the Q&A format. If you have additional questions that we didn't touch on, please comment below or message me through LinkedIn. If you enjoy the content, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next week.